Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So, when I talk about the book of Ruth, what do most of people out there know about the book of Ruth? Not much? Yeah, I didn't think so. Perhaps you've heard a few sermons on it. Maybe, but probably not very many. In fact, I heard one of you, who I will not name, mention this book as a useless little book. It is indeed a small book of only 4 chapters. And it is a relatively simple story about 2 women trying to make it in a man's world. I know that sounds kind of like a cliche, but it kind of fits in this case. And interestingly enough, despite this being in the Bible, God isn't really a character in this story. It kind of reminds us of Esther or the wisdom literature, which is kind of similar. You know, why is this story in the Bible? It doesn't seem to make any big theological arguments. It doesn't really advance the biblical story all that much. Nevertheless, Ruth does show up in a few odd places. Like, for example, the genealogy of Jesus in the book of Matthew refers to Ruth. So she does pop up in a few interesting places. Now, we can't solidly place when the book of Ruth was written. It was sometime after the time of King David, but when exactly is a big question mark for us. Some think maybe it was written only a few decades or maybe only a couple centuries afterwards, while others think it dates from the time when the Jews returned from the exile. Now, I would really love it if it had been come from that later time, because that means that it was written at the same time when Ezra and Nehemiah were telling the Jews that they needed to put away all their foreign wives and all their children. Because if Ruth were written at that time, then you would very clearly see that Ruth is standing in sharp contrast with that view. So I'd love it if that were true, but the trouble is we just don't know. But nevertheless, Ruth still does present a counter-argument to those who would forbid marriage to foreigners. The book begins by referencing the days when the judges ruled. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the book of Judges, it was a time of terrible conflict in Israel. There was no central authority, and there was a bunch of terrible conflict. In fact, in the book, it comes near the end of the book, there's a terrible genocide where one tribe is almost entirely exterminated. So there's a lot of political chaos that occurred during the time of the judges. And that's where the book of Ruth is set. And to add to the political chaos, there's a natural disaster. A famine strikes the land. And there's a little bit of a pun there. Hebrew loves puns. Because Bethlehem, the city which we have some familiarity with, actually in Hebrew means house of bread. But in this case, it becomes the place where there is no bread. In the book of Ruth, the names are almost entirely symbolic. Naomi means pleasant. Elimelech, her husband, his name means my God is king. Her son Mahlon, his name means sickly. And Chilion's name means frail. And despite the title of the book, Naomi is really the main character here, not Ruth. The book of Ruth is really her story. She's the one who moves from emptiness to fullness. She is the one who moves from being forsaken to being blessed. In this story, we have this family moving to neighboring Moab, where Elimelech dies. And the sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And both sons die, which shouldn't surprise you given their names, sickly and frail, leaving just the 3 women. Now, in the ancient world, women were totally dependent upon men. When they were young, they were dependent on their fathers. When they were married, they were dependent on their husbands. And when they were widowed, they were dependent on their sons. These women have no men to depend on, but they have stuck together. And since the famine is over, widowed Naomi decides to return home to Bethlehem. Now, Orpah and Ruth, they have no obligation to Naomi whatsoever. When their husbands died, that's when their obligation to Naomi ended. They are free to return to their families. I said to their father's families, which would normally be the way it was, but for some reason Naomi says to return to your mother's family, which is very interesting. And I don't know why it says mother's family there, but maybe there's some little piece there, because normally you'd be returning to your father's family. And in fact, Naomi urges them both to do so. And after much back and forth, Orpah finally relents and leaves. Now, some people pick on Orpah for this, but let's be honest, she was being practical, and it actually took a little bit of time to get her to relent. She was willing to go along, but Naomi kind of talked her into leaving. But Ruth refuses to leave. In fact, Ruth gives this impassioned speech where she promises to remain with Naomi, even converting to her nationality and to her God. They arrive in Bethlehem, and people are so excited to see Naomi. In fact, as I was telling the little kids, it kind of made me think of Baxter, because you can imagine what a long-term, someone who's been away for a while comes back, and everybody in Baxter would be so excited about that. And the Baxter News Network would really have a field day with that, too. They're so excited to see her again. The long-lost member of their community has returned. But when they ask Naomi, "Is that you?" she says, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara instead." And Mara is bitter, because she is bitter. Her life was gone from fullness to emptiness, from blessedness to forsakenness. And she is pretty depressed about her situation. Naomi means pleasant, but now she is Mara, bitter. And that's where this chapter leaves us, right? It leaves us with an empty Naomi, telling people to call her Mara, but with a faithful Ruth. And also that last verse also has another key thing which farm folk get. I never understood this until I lived here in Iowa, because it tells us that the barley harvest is in full force. Oh, yeah, okay. So new life, ooh, a little foreshadowing there, that kind of thing is going on here. Now, there's some important things to remember when you read the book of Ruth. First of all, Moabite women are not normally portrayed positively in the Bible. If you go back to Numbers 25, verses 1 to 3, it relates a story where Moabite women seduced Israelite men into worshiping false gods. It always impresses me how men apparently have no agency in their lives, and somehow women just control them. I don't know how that really works, but that's just kind of the assumption, apparently. Anyway, so that's how Moabite women are depicted in Numbers 25. And in fact, Deuteronomy 23:3 prohibits Moabites from participating in the assembly, even to the 10th generation. Ammonites are the only other group that receives such a harsh rejection. And of course, if Lindsay were here, I would remind her that the Ammonites and the Moabites are those two nations that she read about in Genesis and that story. But anyway, she's not, so I can't give her a hard time about that. So Moabite women lead you to false gods. Moabites should never be allowed into the assembly, even to the 10th generation. And yet the story of Ruth presents an alternative version. The story of Ruth flips that upside down, because who is the faithful one in Ruth? The Moabite. Who is the one that faithfully embodies God's love? Ruth the Moabite. In fact, here we have a Moabite woman who is the very model of faithfulness. She doesn't just follow her legal obligations, she takes the law to the higher level of steadfast love. Now, if you read my email yesterday, which I'm sure you all have, in my email I mentioned the importance of something called hesed. Now, hesed is a Hebrew word that doesn't have an easy way to render it into English. It can mean something like loyalty or faithfulness. In the Psalms, it's often rendered as steadfast love. So when you're looking in the Psalms and it talks about the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercies never come to an end. And now I feel like saying he's new every morning, great, but you know that song. And that word's from the Psalm. That's hesed that's talked about right there. Hesed is God's care for God's people. That's one of the things that demonstrates hesed. And as the beloved children of God, our calling is to respond with hesed. In a sentence, I guess you might say that hesed is really love in action. It's not just a feeling, not just a mentality, but something that God and people do for each other. God's faithful love is hesed, and the human faithful response is hesed. Daughter-in-law Ruth, despite having no legal requirement to do this, lives out hesed in her relationship with Naomi. And we'll be saying more about that as we continue through the book of Ruth in the next few weeks. Naomi's story is central here in the book of Ruth. We see her in the beginning of the book with her husband and her 2 sons. They do have to leave their homeland due to famine, but otherwise that's a good place to be, right? She can depend on her husband, and once he's gone, she has 2 sons to support her in her widowhood. But then almost in an instant, in fact, the way the text reads it, and one of the commentators said, well, the men are quickly gotten rid of in the story. And they really are. They just disappear like that. The two sons disappear in one verse. Gone. Kind of goes back to that whole wisdom tradition concept of vanity, right? Everything being ethereal, ephemeral. But, of course, their names were sickly and frail, so what do you expect? She loses it all, or at least thinks she has lost it all. First, her husband, and then her 2 sons die. She is now empty. She is now full of bitterness. She returns home a lost and forsaken soul. She sees no light at the end of the tunnel. She sees no hope. And yet, right with her, through this all, is Ruth. Ruth is standing by her. Ruth is demonstrating hesed. Ruth is showing faithful and loyal love no matter what. And the barley harvest is just beginning. So there is hope in this hard time. And this translates directly into our experience. If you are feeling lost, if you are feeling depressed, if you are feeling hopeless, if you feel like your life is dried up and you have become an empty husk, if your financial situation is in dire straits, if your health is iffy and you're worried about the future, if you've lost family and friends and feel like you've lost it all, perhaps as you read this story of Ruth, you're thinking, wow, I'm just like Naomi. be sure that all of you at some point in life will reach that point where you will feel like Naomi. You will feel like you have lost it all. But in those times of hardship, in those times of despair, in those times of hopelessness, look for your Ruth. Now, in that day and age, that wouldn't have meant very much, right? Because she would be looking for a male figure to rescue her. Because that's the way the system was set up back then. Little did she know that God was at work in her life, not through the male rescuer family member, but through a female, through her daughter-in-law, which even under the strict laws of patriarchal relationships wasn't even technically in her family. Ruth was by her side. Ruth was showing her hesed. Ruth was demonstrating faithful love. So know that in those dark times, when you feel lost, depressed, or hopeless, when you feel dried up and bitter, know that you are not abandoned. You are not lost. You just need to learn to see things a little differently. Realize that there are still people in your life who love you and care for you and are standing by you. Maybe they're not the people that you want to be standing by you, but they're with you anyway. And through those acts of hesed that they show to you, you can realize that you are not abandoned and that you are not lost. And through all the times of hardship, you will realize that there is still very much